I've been a member of this congregation since 1985. We started attending when our children were small, and we wanted to have some foundation in religious education for them that we could not provide given our own faith backgrounds. The kids grew up, and I truly feel that their spiritual and moral grounding in this congregation has served them well. And I'm still here. We now light the chalice, the symbol of our living faith. If you are joining us online, you may wish to light a candle or chalice of your own. I invite you to hear today's chalice lighting words, an excerpt from The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. So, let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. And every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country, our people diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn balloons as we free it, where there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it.
Oh, vote, vote, vote for democracy. Vote, vote, vote for the right to be free. Yes, vote, vote, vote for democracy. Stand on guard for your country. We live in a land where people are free. We live in a place with democracy. On election day, we can all have a say in who will lead this country. So vote, vote, vote for democracy. Vote, vote, vote for the right to be free. Yes, vote, vote, vote for democracy. Stand on guard for your country. Stand on guard for your country.
So we're not asking the kids up here today because this is very short, but I want to see a show of hands. Anyone, any age who's here, and Zoom, you can type it in the chat. I'll see it when I get back up there. Did your school do mock elections? Hands up if your school did mock elections, or if it does it now. Do you do a vote for the president or the senator or whoever? So some people do. Okay, my school did. That was back. The first one I remember is Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan in 1980. Yeah. Yep. So they always felt a little silly. Somebody would always write in Mickey Mouse or something like that, right? But it made me think, even in the second grade, about what we were doing. And my parents always took me to the polls. Whose parents took them to the polls before they were old enough to vote? Yes. Who took your children? Who took your children? Yes. So this is a family activity, because before you're legal to vote, you can think about voting. And of course, you can vote in your student government elections, and you can vote in to select leadership and to make decisions in other organizations of which you're a part. And in Canada and in the United States and in democracies around the world, we honor the right to make those choices for ourselves, and sometimes we have to defend them so they are not taken away. So that's what we'll be talking about up here today, and so I'm going to invite our kids who are going to go off to class to go with, I would say, with Mr. Eric, who I lost track of, who's right there. So like I said, we didn't come up here, but if everyone could, who's heading off to class, go ahead with Mr. Eric while we sing our kids away.
As you go, rejoice around you. As you go in peace. Know our love is with you always.
Our reading today is You Are Who I Love by Aracelis Girmay. It has been edited for length, though it is a gorgeous poem, and you may wish to seek it out to read it in full at another time. It's still pretty long, so bear with me. You Are Who I Love by Aracelis Girmay. You, selling roses out of a silver grocery cart. You, in the park, feeding the pigeons. You, cheering the bees. You, with cats in your voice in the morning, feeding cats. You, protecting the river. You, who I love, delivering babies, nursing the sick. You, with henna on your feet and a gold star in your nose. You, taking your medicine, reading the magazines. You, looking into the faces of young people as they pass, smiling and saying, "All right," which, they know it, means, "I see you, family, I love you, keep on." You, dancing on the sidewalk, in the subway. You, stirring the pot of beans. You, washing your father's feet. You are who I love, changing policies, standing in line for water, stocking the food pantries, making a meal. You are who I love, writing letters, calling the senators. You, who with the seconds of your body, with your time here, arrive on buses, on trains, in cars, by foot to stand in the January streets against the cool and brutal offices, saying, "Your cruelty does not speak for me." You are who I love, you struggling to see. You struggling to love or find a question. You better than me, you kinder and so blistering with your anger. You are who I love, standing in the wind, salvaging the umbrellas, graduating from school, wearing holes in your shoes. You are who I love, weeping or touching the faces of the weeping. You who did and did not survive. You who cleaned the kitchens. You who built the railroad tracks and roads. You who replanted the trees, listening to the work of squirrels and birds. You are who I love. You whose blood was taken, whose hands and lives were taken, with or without your saying. Yes, I mean to give. You are who I love. You who beat and did not beat the odds. You who knows that any good thing you have is the result of someone else's sacrifice, work. You who fights for reparations. You are who I love. You who stands at the courthouse with the sign that reads, "No justice, no peace." You studying the stars. You are who I love, braiding your child's hair. You are who I love, crossing the desert and trying to cross the desert. You are who I love, working the shifts to buy books, rice, tomatoes, bathing your children as you listen to the lecture, heating the kitchen with the oven, up early, up late. You are who I love, learning English, learning Spanish, drawing flowers on your hand with a ballpoint pen, taking the bus home. You are who I love, speaking plainly about your pain, sucking your teeth every time the politicians say something that offends your sense of decency, which is often. I love your working heart, how each of its gestures, tiny or big, stand beside my own agony, building a forest there. You are who I love, carrying the signs, packing the lunches, with the rain on your face. You at the edges and shores, in the rooms of quiet, in the rooms of shouting. And each of us looking out from the gorgeous unlikelihood of our lives at all, finding ourselves here witnesses to each other's tenderness, which at this moment is fury, is rage, which at this moment is another way of saying, you are who I love. You are who I love. You and you and you are who.
Thank you, Steve. It's a really beautiful poem. First things first, tomorrow is the last day to register to vote in Pennsylvania for the general election upcoming on November 8th. You can visit vote.pa.gov and click on register to vote and do it online. I registered before the primary when I first moved here earlier this year. It was very quick and very easy to do online. So why do we talk about voting during worship? Because the act of voting is sacred work. It is a caretaking act. Both of my grandmothers were born into this nation at a time when they would not have been granted the right to vote on account of their sex. They were born into a nation which did not consider them full citizens, which did not yet acknowledge the importance of hearing from all citizens of a country when it is time to select leaders and to make decisions. The evolution of the democratic process has meant a great broadening of who it is that the process exists to serve to the benefit of all, and a great broadening of who may participate. It was important to me, growing up, to learn how recently this right had been granted to me, only about 50 years before I was born, how recently my full citizenship had been secured. Learning that a right can be given leads to the parallel learning that a right can be taken away. The more we learn how fleeting a right may be, the more precious it can and should become. I would ask us today to consider how precious our rights to vote, to participate in a democratic society, however flawed, are. When we reflect on the way rights may be taken away, it may feel particularly heavy on our hearts in this season, at this time. And when we feel heavy within our hearts, we think, or I hope that we think, of our faith community as a place to turn. Unitarian Universalists have a deep and long-standing relationship with democratic ideals. That's democratic with a lowercase d. They are so important that they are enshrined within our 7 principles, most expressly within our 5th principle, which states, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Much as the democratic process has broadened its circle of participants in our nation, so too has the democratic process within our congregations grown to promote the participation of many more people with different life experiences, personal beliefs, and journeys of faith. And yet, we acknowledge that this process is not complete in our nation or in our congregations. Who is welcome? Who has a voice? Who has a vote? How often do we hear and consider the words, the ideals, and the opinions of those whose lives and worldview are deeply different from our own? Unitarian Universalism has some of its roots within the Congregationalist movement of the Puritans, early settlers and colonizers of this country, who found their way here in order to be free to worship and form religious community in the way of their own choosing, rather than being beholden to a corrupt structure of church leadership in England. Puritans still had many requirements in order to join their self-governed churches, principally a personal direct experience of revelation from God. Over time, congregational churches and those faith communities arising from that tradition have increasingly made the way for more and more to participate in the vital life of the congregation. In matters of faith, as in matters of civic engagement, the key principle I wish to draw our attention to today is connection. So here's our trivia question. Who has heard of the Cambridge Platform? So no other people who went to seminary then. All right, that's fine. You never know. There might be somebody hiding in the audience who's like, oh, I love the Cambridge Platform. It's my favorite platform. So, in 1637, in the area that would become known as Dedham, Massachusetts, there were about 30 families living there, and they wanted to start a church. But they didn't even know each other. So what were they to do? How to form those relationships? And in our UUA curriculum, Faith Like a River, this answer is given. To that end, they began a year-long series of cottage meetings, each organized around discussion of a particular question. We might think that in order to know each other's religious views and needs, these New England ancestors might choose topics like salvation, damnation, predestination, or morality. But they did not. What they mostly discussed were matters of civil organization, for in their understanding, the church would reflect the ethic of the larger society, and what they longed for was sincere religious association based in love and founded in freedom. There is, of course, another conversation to be had here about whose freedom they meant by this statement. The history of the expansion of the democratic ideals was and is a slow process indeed. Still, that would be a much longer sermon. By 1648, remember these discussions started in 1637, by 1648 there were a number of congregations that had grown up in that area around these discussions, and those congregations together adopted a document, the Cambridge Platform, prescribing the acts of cooperation and support that should define their religious and interreligious life. Some of those that adopted this platform were parts or precursors of Unitarian Universalist congregations that still exist in that area today. The most important factor for these particular ancestors in faith was to address the question, how shall we live? This question, in conversation with a partner question, what happens when we die? Those two questions in conversation form the basis of the wide swath of social, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual endeavor that we call religion. What happens when we die will likely always be up for debate, nothing known for certain until we can no longer report back. How we shall live, however, is a resonant and a holy question that we can work with day in and day out on our quest for an existence, not just for ourselves, but for all, that is both just and joyous. Speaking of the role of faith in democracy, the Reverend Parisa Parsa, my colleague currently serving our congregation in Newton, Massachusetts, has written this. If faith's necessary companion is doubt, democracy's necessary companion is alienation. We who keep returning to faith do so because we live steadily with doubt, and we make a choice to live into it and let it deepen our relationship with the sacred. We who live in a democracy are constantly asked to choose between our faith in the abstract ideals of our political system and our doubt that we can affect anything at all. It's the same basic question that is at the heart of all religious journeys. Will I act as if I am connected to something greater, and therefore as if my life and my actions are significant? Or will I act as if I am completely separate and isolated from others, and therefore as if my life and actions are of little or no consequence? Forming community, staying in community, making decisions as a community, this is hard spiritual work. Staying in it, staying in the work of democracy when we are awash in fear, in doubt, in tales of corruption and injustice that weaken our resolve and increase our despair, that is hard spiritual work. When we choose to live into our principles, our Unitarian Universalist values, it will provide us with challenges again and again. And if we do not return, despite those challenges, if we do not return to the work of co-creating a just and joyous world for all, then we give ourselves over to alienation, to separation, to creating a hell for ourselves here on earth. After all, this is what our Universalist ancestors have to teach us. No loving God would condemn us to hell, but we can certainly create it for ourselves. Actively or passively, if we do not side with love, with justice and joy and the hard work of human community and democracy, we will create the hell of separation, of alienation that diminishes the human spirit and drains the very force of our lives. And that's why I chose today's reading. Steve, you did a wonderful job. You are who I love. This poem by Aracelis Girmay was written as part of a conversation between poets created by Split This Rock, which is an organization whose mission is calling poets to a greater role in public life and fostering a national network of socially engaged poets. This poem was part of a collection that arose from that conversation around the future of democracy in January 2017. I'll share the end of the poem with you again. This poem that I consider a love letter to all who struggle, who doubt and question and rage and stay in it anyway, who keep voting and helping others vote, even when it feels like the tiniest ritual in the face of terrifying rising tides of injustice, indifference, and fear. I love your working heart, how each of its gestures, tiny or big, stand beside my own agony, building a forest there. You are who I love, carrying the signs, packing the lunches with the rain on your face. You at the edges and shores, in the rooms of quiet, in the rooms of shouting, and each of us looking out from the gorgeous unlikelihood of our lives at all, finding ourselves here, witnesses to each other's tenderness, which this moment is fury, is rage, which this moment is another way of saying, you are who I love. You are who I love. You and you and you are who. May our circles ever expand. May our empathy grow. And may we make the move to connection, to interdependence, and to the holy work before us. Register to vote. Make a plan to vote. Many of you may have already voted by mail. Please vote. Please help others to do so. All of us need all of us to stay in it. May it be so.
Please join us now in extinguishing our chalice and your home chalices if you have lit them with these words. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
All of us need all of us to stay in it. All of us need all of us to make it. Democracy is not just the petty squabbles we read on the news or the huge squabbles that feel threatening to our very way of life. They are those things, and they are a higher ideal. I ask you to hold yourselves in conversation with that ideal. Whatever the future brings, I ask you to stay in it. May the light of our faith community guide the way. So may it be.